30 years ago, dungeons suddenly appeared around the world. Monsters came pouring out, and people began awakening special powers. Those who awakened became hunters and quickly started making serious money by clearing dungeons. But our protagonist wasn't one of them. He awakened with absolutely nothing. So instead, he became a dungeon scavenger, cleaning up after other hunters and picking through whatever scraps they left behind. Basically, everyone else was collecting treasures while this guy was collecting garbage. At least he had a female friend who worked alongside him, scavenging the same scraps. That's why she was so happy when they found a decent-sized crystal, only for them to discover that the thing was worth barely 30 bucks. For him, that was just another normal day as a complete failure. But then a lawyer suddenly showed up with news that his father had died and left something behind for him. The protagonist barely even remembers his father, so he has no idea what to expect. Then the lawyer hands him a strange necklace, and his friend immediately recognizes it as a return stone, an artifact that can supposedly be used inside dungeons to escape. Little does he know, this weird necklace is about to completely change his life. Later, he's sitting at home watching TV when the strongest hunter in the country appears on screen, talking about how his group managed to clear an S-rank dungeon. The guy is rich, famous, handsome, and basically living the life our protagonist could only dream about. Meanwhile, all this loser has is the strange necklace his father left behind. But then he grips the artifact, and his hand suddenly starts glowing. The light gets brighter and brighter until he completely panics, and before he can figure out what is happening, he's teleported to another world. A system immediately welcomes him, and mana starts circulating through his body for the first time. The talentless loser has finally awakened, but the system isn't finished surprising him. It announces that he has entered Hell difficulty while being the lowest level person there, so he receives an SSS rank title called Good Luck, with boosted effects as compensation. He even takes first place in the Hell difficulty ranking, and earns the title Hell's Strongest, making him the final survivor. He doesn't understand any of this and starts calling out for someone, probably already thinking he's lost his mind. Then he spots a giant dungeon crystal, but before he can enjoy his first piece of treasure, something attacks him. He starts spitting liquid, gets poisoned and paralyzed, and watches his stamina drain little by little. The system recognizes the attack, and just like that, our supposedly lucky protagonist dies for the first time after only 4 minutes in this world, killed by a level 1 piece of dust. Sometime later, Hyunmoo wakes up and immediately wonders if he is still trapped inside some kind of dream. Before he can figure anything out, the system informs him that the mission has begun and that he has to survive until sunrise. Fear instantly kicks in. He gets up, starts running, and realizes just how horrible this situation really is. In desperation, he swears revenge on whoever is forcing him to go through all of this, even though he has no clue who is behind it. A moment later, the system reports that his survival lasted only 5 minutes. Hyunmoo drops to his knees, apologizes, and desperately begs God once again, but the cycle continues. The next attempt ends after 11 minutes, with the system also reporting that his poison resistance and paralysis resistance have increased. His second plan is to get rid of the fine dust by breathing it out, but that attempt also ends with another death. After his 14th death, Hyunmoo starts looking back at what actually helped him survive the longest. He realizes that his best result came when he simply focused on breathing. He tries to remember what that technique was called, eventually recalling the breathing methods he had learned as a child. Back then, he had been taught to keep his breath lower inside his lungs, and his instructor had even recognized that he had more potential than any other child he had seen. Thinking about those memories, Hyunmoo sits down and focuses completely on his breathing. He dies again, but this time, he manages to survive for 1 hour and 41 minutes. By his 28th death, Hyunmoo feels that his body has become lighter and wonders if his level has increased, but the system reveals that the poison inside his body has reached a critical point. Instead of killing him, however, the poison triggers the acquisition of an ability called Poisonous Blood. Because of it, he will no longer take damage from poison. Completely stunned, Hyunmoo tries to understand what just happened. He realizes that repeatedly breathing in the fine dust may have increased his resistance, until his body itself became poisonous, and even he finds the whole thing completely absurd. Looking around, Hyunmoo notices crystal moss scattered all over the area. He casually wishes that all of those shiny crystals were real, and to his shock, the crystal suddenly vanishes. The system immediately informs him that his inventory has been enabled. After reading the instructions, he realizes that those shiny objects lying along the path really were crystal moss. That realization makes him understand that he can apparently do all kinds of things now. Still trying to process everything, he notices a strange sound he has been hearing for a while. Something about it feels familiar. Then the noise grows louder, and Hyunmoo instantly panics. He takes off running as a massive cloud of mosquitoes starts chasing him. While desperately trying to shake them off, the system informs him that his abilities have increased in comparison to his level. Before he can even process that, countless mosquitoes fly straight into his mouth as he screams in desperation. The system then announces another death, this time after a survival time of 6 hours and 18 minutes. It also reveals that his poisonous blood allowed him to poison and kill more than 100 monsters at once. Hyunmoo starts wondering if the mosquitoes died simply because they sucked his now poisonous blood, but things somehow get even worse. The system reports that he has contracted an abnormal state and will begin losing health continuously. He completely panics, pointing out that he had literally just returned from death, and somehow this nonsense is already happening again. The system continues its notifications, stating that bacteria have accumulated inside his body and that his health has dropped below 10%. Exhausted by the entire situation, Hyunmoo starts feeling like the system is having way too much fun watching him suffer. Then he notices an ability called Dismantle and has no idea when he obtained it. Still, even though it seems like a basic ability, he realizes it has already been surprisingly useful. While sitting and observing the surroundings, he spots a particularly large mosquito. He grabs a chair and decides to test the ability. The moment he gives the command to dismantle, the chair instantly separates into multiple pieces and individual parts. Hyunmoo realizes that if performing actions like this can grant him abilities, then he might be able to obtain even more skills by experimenting. Sure enough, the system informs him that he has learned the creation ability. That finally makes everything click for him. He realizes he has somehow obtained rare abilities through these ridiculous survival attempts. He had planned to experiment with them later, but after everything he has been through, waiting seems pointless. Hyunmoo decides to put his new abilities to build himself a shelter. With his new powers in hand, Hyunmoo realizes he has no idea how long he will remain trapped in hell or what kind of enemies he might run into next. If he wants to survive for longer, he needs somewhere safe to stay. The MC decides to use all the crystal moss he has collected to build himself a shelter. While looking around he spots a newspaper and wonders what is written inside. The system then informs him that he has acquired language, a common ability. Hyunmoo is amused by the thought that there are apparently all kinds of abilities he can obtain here. He starts reading the newspaper and suddenly comes across the name Jitae Lee of Taesung Lee. That immediately makes him wonder if there is some connection between this place and the world he came from. Still holding the newspaper, he carefully observes the surroundings and realizes that the world he knew had eventually been reduced to ruins. With a sigh, he accepts that knowing the truth doesn't mean he can change anything right now. So, our boy decides to focus on surviving and starts dismantling the mosquitoes. After spending so much time dismantling things, Hyunmoo eventually gets tired of it. He starts dismantling stingers, wings, and blood, then grabs a bottle and wonders what he can possibly make with all of them. Suddenly, 3 different materials merge together, creating a dart and leaving him completely confused. The system identifies it as a rare item called Hell Dart. Hyunmoo carefully examines it and realizes that it looks like a consumable item that should be fairly easy to produce. Still, he knows he needs to research it before blindly using anything. A few hours later, he has created a pile of darts, though his shoulders are now aching from all the work. When he activates production again, the system informs him that he has successfully produced a legendary unknown egg. The MC stares at the massive egg in surprise, especially because of its ridiculous size. The system explains that the egg needs to be observed to determine what is inside, and that there is a 50% chance that whatever is inside is either alive or dead. Hyunmoo stuffs the egg inside his shirt, closes his eyes, and starts thinking about what to do next. Suddenly, a strange noise catches his attention. Hyunmoo wonders what could be making it, only to notice a goblin nearby. He is immediately startled and questions why that creature is even here. Before he can react, the goblin notices him as well. Hyunmoo spots a staircase and realizes it is his only possible escape route, but the goblin quickly starts chasing him. Anxious, the MC opens his inventory and grabs a piece of wood to defend himself. The two clash in close combat, and Hyunmoo quickly realizes that the goblin is surprisingly fast. Then the creature says something, completely startling him because it is actually speaking. Hyunmoo grabs a few darts from his inventory and throws them without hesitation. Unfortunately, they barely damage the goblin, only causing some bubbles to appear on its arm. The goblin responds by grabbing an axe and cutting off its own arm. Completely confused, Hyunmoo wonders if the creature's arm reacted that way because his poisonous blood had gotten onto the dart. While he is still trying to understand what happened, the goblin suddenly disappears. Then, without warning, he senses its presence coming from the ceiling. Before he can escape, the goblin slashes him and sends him crashing to the ground. The monster steps on his back but suddenly decides not to finish him, simply walking away while mentioning that there are still some humans left. The system reports that Hyunmoo's resistance has fallen below 10% and that, thanks to the advantage of his title, the last, he will be resurrected. Still lying on the ground, the MC curses the goblins and promises to get his revenge someday. Then, the system announces that the mission is complete. Exhausted, Hyunmoo reflects on everything that has happened and how completely insane the experience has been. The system confirms that he has successfully completed his first night in hell, and our boy can't help but celebrate the fact that he actually survived it. As a reward, he receives a silver box, but the system immediately informs him that it will be upgraded to a gold box. He also learns that the return stone can be used until the next mission begins, and that the next mission will start after 14 days. Hyunmoo is thrilled because he can finally return to his own world. When he opens his eyes, however, He is shocked by the place he finds himself in. A moment later, he realizes it is real. He has actually returned. Laughing and shouting in excitement, Hyunmoo celebrates finally being back in his world. He grabs the stone hanging around his neck, breaks the string, and curses his father for leaving such a ridiculous thing behind. But just before throwing it away, he remembers all the abilities he gained in hell. Someone suddenly approaches and notices Hyunmoo lying on the ground. It turns out to be Yumin, who immediately calls out for her friend and rushes over in concern. She worries that he cannot just remain there like that because he could end up suffering from mana poisoning. Yumin warns him to leave the area before the poisoning gets worse. While listening to her, Hyunmoo tries to explain himself, but Yumin quickly reveals that she has a mana contamination remover. She hands it to him and insists that he use it just to be safe, while he tries to reassure her that everything is fine. That only makes her more irritated. Yumin snaps that he clearly isn't taking the situation seriously, and that he won't be able to regret it once he's dead. Eventually, convinced, Hyunmoo uses the remover and takes a shower. After coming out, he asks what the date is and learns that it is September 11th. The answer leaves the MC confused. Yumin notices his reaction and asks if something happened, explaining that she had been working alone for 2 days because she couldn't contact him. Hyunmoo is stunned because it feels like he had been gone for years, not just 2 days. While he is still processing that, Yumin becomes embarrassed and tells her friend to get dressed. She says she will buy him whatever clothes he needs, because he obviously can't stay like that. Hyunmoo asks what happened to his old clothes, and she points toward a trash bag. They were contaminated and completely torn, so there was no way he could wear them again. With that, Yumin leaves the room and tells her colleague to wait quietly. As soon as Yumin leaves the room, Hyunmoo realizes that the system has activated again. A little confused, he wonders what is happening, only for the system to explain that it is the gold box he received as a reward for completing the mission. Thanks to the effect of his triple S rank good luck title, the quality of his rewards has increased. On top of that, the MC has gained a legendary skill called Battle Assistant. The fact that it is a legendary skill immediately catches his attention. Hyunmoo remembers that there are supposedly only 7 people in the world who possess special skills, which means he has now become the 8th bearer of a legendary skill. Still confused, he wonders what Battle Assistant actually does and whether it will be useful to him. Soon after, Yumin returns with some clothes and suddenly looks startled by what she sees. She asks what her friend is doing, but Hyunmoo is completely at a loss for words. Embarrassed, Yumin decides to pretend she saw nothing and moves on. Later, Yumin explains that the sensible thing would have been to take Hyunmoo to a hospital, but since he looked completely healthy, she brought him back to her home instead. She asks whether he has any powers and why he works as a collector. Hyunmoo explains that he only gained his power recently. He then remembers the research she mentioned earlier and asks her to examine something for him. Curious, Yumin asks what the object is, and the MC pulls out the crystal moss he collected. He admits that he has no idea how much it is worth and figures that since she is researching this kind of thing, she should know more about it. The moment Yumin sees the crystal moss, she is completely shocked. Hyunmoo is holding an entire kilogram of it, and its purity is extremely high. He casually points out that she should know its value better than he does, but Yumin insists that what he is showing her is basically impossible. She asks where he even got such crystal moss because finding one this pure is incredibly difficult. She identifies it as a 5-star stone, leaving Hyunmoo even more curious. He asks whether she became a collector because of her research, and after some hesitation, she admits that she did. Hyunmoo makes it clear that he has no intention of simply giving the crystal moss to her. Instead, he offers to tell her how she can get his crystal moss in exchange for helping him sell it. Yumin thinks the whole thing is ridiculous and explains that something this pure and this large would require additional documents to sell. A smaller stone would be much easier to move, but before she can finish explaining, Hyunmoo casually breaks the crystal moss into 2 pieces. Yumin immediately gets irritated and starts hitting him for destroying something so valuable. Hyunmoo asks her to calm down and then casually reveals that he has another piece of crystal moss that is even bigger. The moment she hears that, Yumin's eyes fill with tears. With a trembling voice, she asks if he really has more, and Hyunmoo confirms it, while once again asking for her help selling the moss. After agreeing, he gives her 2 conditions. Nobody can know where the crystal moss came from, and he himself will be the one selling it. Yumin accepts because that is still better than watching such precious crystals get broken apart. She explains that this level of purity can only normally be obtained from the first dungeon, making the fact that Hyunmoo is casually crushing it almost unbelievable. The MC decides that he will figure out what to do next depending on how well Yumin manages to sell the crystal moss. He then gets up, grabs the clothes from the trash bag, and prepares to leave. Yumin, however, invites him to stay at her house for the night. The next morning, both of them wake up, and Yumin reminds Hyunmoo that he has a meeting point arranged with the buyer. A week later, Hyunmoo and Yumin head outside together. Yumin tells her friend that he doesn't need to come with her, but he insists on going just in case something happens. Still, she assures him that this kind of trade isn't nearly as dangerous as he seems to think. The MC knows that even though he is asking Yumin to handle the sales, people in society are already losing everything because of the current situation. The two continue searching for the next client who is interested in the crystal moss. Along the way, Hyunmoo notices an intimidating man staring in his direction and immediately gets nervous, thinking it was a good thing he hadn't come to the location alone. But then he realizes they had been watching the wrong person. Their actual client is the man sitting behind him. Yumin approaches and explains that she has brought her partner this time. Hyunmoo realizes he had completely focused on the wrong guy. The buyer introduces himself as Park Hwiso and shakes hands with Hyunmoo. From that single handshake, the MC can already tell that Park is incredibly strong. If a fight breaks out, there is no way he could defeat him. The system also informs Hyunmoo that his abilities have increased. After examining the crystal moss, Park asks whether the payment should be deposited into the same account as before, and Yumin confirms it. The man then leaves, mentioning that he hopes to meet Hyunmoo again. That immediately leaves the MC confused. Yumin also finds his behavior strange because Park had never greeted her like that before. Hyunmoo starts wondering if Park is acting differently because he discovered something about the person who actually unearthed the crystal moss. Yumin laughs and asks if her friend seriously thought the buyer was going to rob them. She tells him not to look so gloomy because negotiations like this can sometimes be handled carefully. Then she asks what else is going through his mind and casually brings up the fact that $1 million is about to enter his account. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone asks Park whether the negotiation was successful. Park confirms that it was, and explains that he obtained all the crystal moss currently available on the market. The other man points out that if all those pieces are combined, the total amount is surprisingly large. He then questions how so much crystal moss suddenly appeared on the market at once. Looking at one of the pieces, he asks Park what he thinks about the situation. Park explains that the crystal moss has a purity level that can only be found in a 5-star dungeon. On top of that, the person behind it seems to be a powerful hunter. They consider the possibility that the person is secretly exploring 5-star dungeons or perhaps belongs to a foreign clan. However, they can't understand why someone from another country would have any particular interest in Korea. They begin asking about the person who negotiated the deal with Park and whether anyone accompanied her. Even so, they agree that obtaining this much crystal moss is already an incredible achievement. The unknown man then wonders just how strong someone would need to be to gather that much crystal moss from a 5-star dungeon. After considering everything, they conclude that Hyunmoo must be at least as strong as a captain. The man then asks Park to help investigate both the mysterious hunter and Yumin, the person negotiating on his behalf. Park confidently says that he will handle the investigation. As the conversation continues, the identity of the man speaking with Park is finally revealed. It is Captain Lee Jae. A few days later, Hyunmoo is back in hell and training again. After reaching his 150th push-up, he finally drops from the bar. He thinks that if he were in the real world, he could have done another 1,000. But even lifting himself a little more is already making him exhausted here. Lying on the ground, the MC wonders how long he has been back in hell. The system informs him that the next mission will begin in 18 hours. Looking at the necklace, Hyunmoo realizes that after going back and forth between hell and the real world a few times, he is finally starting to understand how the whole thing works. He figures that the time he spends living in hell also passes in the real world, meaning the remaining mission time corresponds to the time passing outside as well. The only problem is that his location changes every time he returns from hell. He understands everything else, but this part is ridiculously complicated. Irritated, he wonders why his location keeps changing, then drops back onto the ground while mumbling that he still doesn't understand. The system appears again and explains that Battle Assistant optimizes accuracy by recording and controlling the movements of the skill user. Thinking about it, Hyunmoo realizes that in a game, an assistant like this would basically be an illegal cheat or hack. Getting a cheat of this level means he probably has no chance of surviving hell without it. Battle Assistant activates as he begins training with punches. While throwing his attacks, the MC notices something strange about his movements. It feels like his attacks are gradually being aimed at a single point. He tries to strike again, but becomes frustrated by the strange feeling. Hyunmoo starts wondering if the skill has recorded all of his movements and is now altering them automatically. He still doesn't fully understand what the assistant is doing, but the whole thing feels completely unreal. Then a new mission begins, and its name is Friend of a Beginner. Hyunmoo is immediately confused by the word beginner. He is already level 7, so he doesn't understand why he is receiving a beginner mission. Remembering the information about scarecrows, he also realizes that he hasn't seen any in the area. Since he needs to level up anyway, he decides to start moving. While exploring hell, Hyunmoo eventually comes across a staircase. The place immediately gives him horror movie vibes, and he becomes slightly nervous. Then, the beginner scarecrows appear directly in front of him. At first, he has no idea what those strange things are, but he quickly realizes they are the beginner-level scarecrows mentioned in the mission. The MC looks at them and wishes they could at least make the scarecrows look cool. After observing them, he notices that they don't have levels displayed and assumes they shouldn't suddenly gain experience. Still unsure what these opponents can actually do, Hyunmoo decides there is no harm in throwing a dart at one of them. He prepares the attack, throws it, and immediately hides behind a piece of wood. But the scarecrows don't even move. This makes him wonder if they really are nothing more than scarecrows. Since the monsters barely react to anything, Hyunmoo starts thinking the mission might actually be easy. He walks up and throws a punch, only to be completely shocked. He is certain he hit the opponent with all his strength, yet it feels like he didn't hit anything at all. Suddenly, the scarecrow's eyes turn red, and it announces that opponent recognition has been completed and sparring has begun. Hyunmoo immediately realizes he is in trouble. The scarecrows adjust themselves to match his level, and he wishes they would at least explain what kind of monsters they are before starting the fight. Still, he thanks God that they are slower than the goblins. In the real world, being level 7 is apparently enough to be treated like a bodyguard or soldier with at least 5 years of experience. But in hell, that same level only makes him a beginner. Irritated, Hyunmoo threatens the scarecrows, and the system informs him that Battle Assistant has been activated. Now the MC has to deal with all those robots. Nervous, he prepares for the first attack. One of the opponents suddenly rushes forward with a punch, but Hyunmoo notices the movement and easily dodges it. Seeing an opening, he immediately counterattacks and lands a hit. Unfortunately, another robot catches him and attempts to put him into a chokehold. Hyunmoo drives an elbow into his opponent, hitting it directly, but he still can't break free. He quickly twists his body and strikes the android's head, leaving a noticeable dent in the metal. Confused, he wonders if his attack really worked as expected. At that moment, the robot completes opponent recognition and announces that level 2 sparring has begun. While Hyunmoo is distracted, the other enemies rush in. One grabs his hair with tremendous force, another locks down his arms, and another attacks his legs. Within seconds, the MC is completely immobilized. He desperately tries to make them let go while noticing another opponent approaching. A brutal punch crashes into his face, sending intense pain through his body. Hyunmoo can't believe how badly things have turned against him and realizes he needs some way to defend himself. Suddenly, his physical strength, bleeding resistance, and pain resistance begin increasing, but the androids keep attacking without giving him a moment to breathe. Eventually, his resistance falls below 10%, and thanks to the advantage of his title, the strongest in hell, he is resurrected. Badly injured and covered in severe wounds, Hyunmoo tries to recover, but he quickly realizes it is already too late. His body is completely exhausted from the endless attacks. He can't land even a single proper hit, and begins doubting his own strength, even considering whether running away would be the smarter choice. Still weak and unsteady, he forces himself back onto his feet. After realizing that the opponents are using martial arts, he begins releasing his energy. He needs something powerful enough to deal with these enemies once and for all. Soon, an energized baton appears in front of him. The ugly wooden weapon has been strengthened and now possesses high attack power, although its durability is still poor. Hyunmoo grabs the baton and charges forward, determined to end the fight. His eyes are filled with rage as he prepares to take down the robots. The androids assume their combat positions and wait for him. Hyunmoo swings the baton with everything he has and completely destroys one of the robot's arms. He watches the damage carefully, but the moment the robot is hit, opponent recognition activates again. Almost instantly, an unknown weapon begins emerging from the robot's body. Hyunmoo realizes he is in serious trouble. Then every opponent pulls out a powerful weapon, with all of them aimed directly at him. After a total survival time of 5 days, the MC dies again. Breathless, but still determined, Hyunmoo clenches his fists and prepares to fight despite his exhaustion. One of the androids launches a brutal attack, giving him barely any time to react. With a fierce shout, he pours all his strength into a powerful and precise punch. He realizes that using the wall to pin the robots down might be a cheap move, but at this point, he has no other choice. With Battle Assistant functioning, he believes he might be able to handle them one-on-one. He releases all the energy inside his body, and the entire environment suddenly becomes brightly illuminated. His next goal is simple. He needs to break the enemy's core. As he approaches one of the robots, opponent recognition finishes again, and the system announces that level 3 sparring has begun. Hyunmoo launches a series of heavy attacks against the android. As the opponent becomes stronger, so does he. But the mission keeps ending in failure. He loses track of how many times he has died. In one attempt, a robot attacks him from behind and kills him. In another, a precise kick destroys him. Even a ring-style fighting technique is enough to end his life. Countless attempts pass, and the same mission keeps killing him over and over. The MC becomes seriously irritated by the endless martial arts techniques destroying his body. He realizes the robot must know an absurd number of fighting styles because it barely repeats the same moves. Then the opponent plants both feet firmly on the ground and waits for the next exchange. The two stare each other down, each preparing for the next move. Hyunmoo never imagined he would repeatedly die in a one-on-one fight, so he remains confident that he can eventually win. He leaps toward the android, but his punch is cleanly deflected without any tricks. Confused, he lands directly in front of his opponent and plants one foot down to regain his balance. He immediately throws a kick toward the robot's head. At that moment, opponent recognition completes again, and level 4 sparring begins. The MC is actually happy that he finally reached level 4, but before he can celebrate, the robot's middle fingers strike his eyes. The android then opens its mouth and bites down on his leg with crushing force. Hyunmoo screams in complete despair as the robot tears apart his leg. Watching the absurd sight, he can't help but compare the metal monster to some kind of giant dog before dying all over again. By the end of his 9th attempt, Hyunmoo had figured out 3 important things. First, the combat level stopped at level 4, meaning the patterns no longer changed or became more complicated after reaching that point. While fighting the robots, he kept analyzing their movements and drawing new conclusions. Even with sweat pouring down his face and exhaustion hitting hard, the MC refused to give up on any attempt. Second, the scarecrows followed fixed movement patterns. Whenever there was even a slight mistake in their movements, they would stop and correct themselves. Once Hyunmoo understood that, he began defeating some of them along the way. His determination to win was huge, and even his fatigue couldn't stop him. Finally, he realized there was no need to completely destroy the scarecrows. Once they received enough damage, they simply stopped moving. There was no reason to waste energy finishing them off. Understanding those 3 facts completely changed the results. Soon, Hyunmoo was completing the sparring repeatedly, and with every fight, he gained more skills and combat experience. The MC was determined to learn everything he could from them. Even though he knew it wasn't necessary, he eventually destroyed one of the scarecrows anyway. Once enough damage was dealt, the fight would end. With all his remaining energy, Hyunmoo continued throwing powerful blows at his opponents. Another warning soon appeared, confirming that the sparring had been completed. Shortly after that, the Friend of a Beginner mission was finally completed. Exhaustion and happiness were both written across the MC's face as he looked at the fallen scarecrows scattered around him. Seeing every single one lying on the ground with no chance of getting back up was strangely satisfying. But after everything he had gone through, Hyunmoo was completely drained and dropped to the ground to catch his breath. He had wanted to fight opponents who were actually at his level, so he still couldn't take the mission's name seriously. There was nothing beginner level about this. To Hyunmoo, it felt more like the robots had beaten their fighting techniques directly into him until he learned them. Once he recovered a little, he decided to check his rewards. Thanks to the effect of his triple S rank good luck title, the quality of his rewards had increased. A wrapping cloth suddenly appeared in his hands. The system identified it as the legendary Celestial Cradle, a cloth item capable of accelerating growth and completely restoring bodily damage. Hyunmoo was both happy and disappointed because he had absolutely no clue how to use it. He even wondered if wrapping it around his head might somehow make him smarter. With no better idea, he actually placed the cloth around his head. Nothing happened. Embarrassed, he was grateful that there were no spectators around to witness that disaster. In the end, the MC figured the cloth might not be very useful to him since dying and resurrecting already restored his body perfectly. Since it was a legendary item, he decided he would rather sell it and keep the money. While checking his system, Hyunmoo notices the egg he had obtained from dismantling the mosquitoes. He wonders if the Celestial Cradle might work on it somehow, but his idea doesn't have the desired effect. The MC decides that selling these useless items might be the best option. Then, without warning, the egg begins transforming. Pieces of the shell start flying everywhere, immediately making him suspicious. The eggshell slowly cracks, and he starts worrying that some kind of cannibalistic monster might hatch from it. As the cracks spread further, his fear only grows. Suddenly, a powerful light bursts directly into the MC's face. The energy is so intense that the egg explodes into countless pieces. From inside emerges a tiny and peculiar creature. Instead of a terrifying monster, a small fairy is peacefully sleeping inside the egg. Hyunmoo is completely confused because this is definitely not what he expected. Soon, the little fairy slowly opens her eyes, having apparently just come to life. The MC carefully examines the strange creature and pokes her with his finger, surprised that she is even smaller than he imagined. But the fairy suddenly bites his finger with her tiny teeth. Hyunmoo immediately suspects that he has somehow ended up with a cannibal monster after all. To him, the reward suddenly feels completely worthless. Then he notices the fairy whining because she is hungry. Seeing how miserable she looks, Hyunmoo decides to help. He takes a candy from his pocket and offers it to her, but she rejects it immediately. Instead, she points directly at him, leaving the MC completely confused. Apparently, she is interested in him, trying to satisfy her hunger. Hyunmoo offers a little of his blood. The fairy immediately controls the bleeding once her hunger is satisfied. The entire situation disgusts him, but he can't exactly complain, since he obtained the egg by dismantling mosquitoes in the first place. Besides, the little fairy looks suspiciously like a mosquito, so he starts wondering if she might be some kind of mosquito fairy. The creature happily declares that the meal was extremely satisfying, but immediately starts asking for dessert. Hyunmoo can't believe the audacity of this little monster. She quickly corrects herself and thanks him for the meal, calling him her butler. Hyunmoo releases her and asks what her name is, but the fairy desperately searches her memory and realizes she can't remember it. She also firmly denies being any kind of mosquito fairy. After struggling for a while, she finally remembers what she is. She is a fairy, supposedly destined to appear at the end of the world, with the purpose of eating every living thing once the apocalypse arrives. Hyunmoo is left confused because her delicate appearance doesn't exactly match those horrifying intentions. His biggest question now is whether he should simply kill her. The fairy awkwardly explains that she promised to eat all living things when the world ended. Even after hearing that, the MC can't imagine this tiny creature actually being capable of eating everything. He also remembers that his blood is extremely poisonous, powerful enough to melt a goblin's hands, yet the fairy had consumed it without suffering any damage. Curious, Hyunmoo examines her and starts thinking about her abilities and level. Eventually, he realizes that the easiest way to deal with her might be to domesticate her and keep her as a pet. Still unsure about the creature's true intentions, he gives her a new name, Renian. The fairy immediately likes the name. In her language, however, it apparently sounds similar to an agent of the apocalypse, leaving Hyunmoo completely speechless. In the end, Hyunmoo asks Renian to make one promise. She must never eat a human. If she ever becomes so hungry that she is close to dying, she can eat something else, but never him. In exchange, he agrees to give her a little more of his blood. While the fairy celebrates another meal, the MC thinks it might be a good idea if her diet remains somewhat unbalanced. The two then notice the battlefield surrounding them. It looks like the aftermath of a glorious victory, with destroyed robots scattered everywhere. Hyunmoo studies the scene and notices that one of them has been split completely in half. Even he can't believe he managed to destroy something that brutally. The system suddenly opens and displays an alarming but intriguing notification. Valiant energy has been added to Battle Assistant. Curious about the new trait, Hyunmoo lifts one of the robots and tries to balance it. He quickly decides that there is no point overthinking things and immediately puts the new ability to the test. With a powerful punch, he strikes one of the dead androids and completely destroys it, even shocking himself with the result. Renian is equally amazed by the power he just displayed. Wanting to try it herself, she starts punching the robots, and her punches turn out to be 100 times stronger than the MC's. At that moment, another warning about opponent recognition appears. Suddenly, all the fallen robots begin getting back up. Hyunmoo immediately takes his fighting stance as they slowly start walking toward him. The system identifies him as a superhuman and deactivates the lock. He has no idea what being a superhuman actually means, so he simply looks around in confusion. One of the robots points towards something nearby. Hyunmoo begins removing the junk piece by piece, while Renian suddenly notices an incredibly fragrant smell. The scent grabs her attention, and she points toward where it is coming from. After moving a table out of the way, Hyunmoo discovers a human skeleton. Renian finds the smell extremely pleasant and immediately grabs the bones and starts gnawing on them. Hyunmoo quickly tells her that she can't eat dead people either. While looking at the skeleton, he notices a letter in its hand. After opening it, he reads about what happened to the world. 3 years have passed since the nightmare began, and children born during the toxic era have already died. Even ability users couldn't withstand the conditions and started dying as well. Hope continued disappearing. Humanity was moving toward extinction, and the letter mentioned the deaths of Priest Johan and Professor Park Hyo-sok. However, it wasn't signed, so Hyunmoo has no way of knowing who wrote it. The MC doesn't take the contents of the letter too seriously at first, but after comparing it with the message he saw when he first entered this place, he realizes that it describes the future of the world he had already seen. Then he finds a return stone. Renian immediately asks if she can eat it, but Hyunmoo starts thinking about the potential of the skeleton and asks her to hand the object over. The moment he touches the return stone, a powerful light fills the entire area. Hyunmoo desperately tries to understand what is happening, but his hand becomes stuck to the stone. He can't let go. His hand remains frozen in place until the return stone suddenly shatters into several pieces. A sharp pain immediately shoots through his body. Looking at his palm, the MC notices something extremely strange. The design from the return stone has somehow been transferred onto his hand. Then a warning appears, stating that the stars are watching him. Suddenly, everything around him begins to change. Renian says goodbye and leaves, telling Hyunmoo to survive and return on his own. Meanwhile, he remains trapped by some kind of supernatural force, becoming more and more desperate as the world around him continues to transform. Suddenly, Hyunmoo finds himself in the middle of the universe, surrounded by countless stars. Completely confused, he has no idea what is happening. He tries moving through the vast space and even calls out for the fairy, but there is no response. Then the system issues a warning. The advanced star Barul has recognized the absorption of a star fragment. Barul is disappointed with the values Hyunmoo had defended until then, so it takes the fragment and leaves in search of answers. The MC becomes nervous and starts joking about the possibility of dying again. He can't believe that an actual star could be disappointed in him. Then another warning appears, announcing that the lock has been opened. Hyunmoo learns that the owners of the stars are beings with absolute dominion over their own territories, somewhere in space. These beings place their absolute power into fragments and lend those fragments to others, hoping their kin will use that power to become rulers and expand their territories. Hyunmoo is now in possession of one of those fragments, which is why the stars have come to see one of their potential kin. His eyes widen as everything finally clicks. The object Renian found was never a return stone. It was a fragment of a star. Hyunmoo pays closer attention to his surroundings and looks up at the intense lights approaching him. Their colors begin intertwining as several stars draw closer. The whispering star monstrel declares that it is searching for its charm capable of deceiving everyone. The conquering star Ardan offers him command over an army of fire and steel. The shattering star gull asks him to follow it in search of the snake that completely swallowed the previous world, offering him a world behind a screen to govern. The wailing star Verde predicts his dominion over everything that has passed. All of these beings are interested in investing their power into Hyunmoo after witnessing his abilities, and now they want him to choose one star to follow. Furious, The MC refuses to make such an important choice without knowing anything about them, so the system reveals more information. Gaul is an absolute ruler who laughs behind carefully planned schemes and operates from the shadows. Verde is the father of pain and melancholy, commanding an army of the dead while watching despair unfold. Yogulem, the starving star, is a snake of greed and desire that wants to swallow everything in this world. Monstrel is the whispering star that instigates things in the light and deceives in the darkness, capable of fooling even powerful beings. Ardon is the conquering star who advances with fire, destroys enemies with steel, and burns the world with hatred. After hearing all that, Hyunmoo notices a certain pattern and wonders if every one of these stars has some kind of personality disorder. The system explains that stars are naturally interested in people who resemble them. The MC immediately rejects the idea that he could possibly be similar to any of these beings. He doesn't consider himself a conspirator, someone obsessed with greed, or being desperate for attention. He is already furious enough about ending up in hell and refuses to believe he fell into this situation simply because he was a bad person. If anything, he thinks he might qualify as trash, but even then, he knows he wasn't exactly a just person either. Still, he insists that he never lived his life as a burden. Maybe he simply failed because he didn't understand certain things. But in his mind, he is still better than those stars. Curious about the consequences of choosing one of them, Hyunmoo asks what would actually change. In response, Gaul opens a space near him and shows the MC a glimpse of his future. The sight immediately shocks him and makes him realize just how terrifying the star's power really is. Now he has to choose one of them, but after everything he has suffered, Hyunmoo isn't exactly trusting. He wonders if there is some hidden price attached to their offers. The answer is simple. He would have to serve and follow the star he chooses. The stars support their kin, while their kin act as representatives of those stars. Choosing a star is an extremely rare opportunity, and if Hyunmoo receives their recognition and continues succeeding, his growth will become much faster. Hyunmoo takes his time before making a decision, which causes the stars to become displeased with his arrogance. Alone with his thoughts, the MC wonders if he should have been a little more careful with his words. Power without an obvious price sounds great, but he still has plenty of reservations. These stars have appeared before him for the first time, yet they are already asking him to choose one for what could practically become a lifelong relationship. He doesn't even know which of them he can trust. After hearing his response, Ardon loses interest in him. Hyunmoo doesn't care and simply says that Ardon can leave. In the end, the stars agree to give him time to think. Happy with that outcome, the MC thanks them for their concern. Suddenly, he returns to the place where he was before. However, the whispering star Monstrel remains shining intensely beside him. Hyunmoo immediately feels uneasy because he has no idea what it wants. Monstrel sends several shocks through his body, making the MC complain about the pain, before eventually leaving with the others. The system then informs him that Monstrel has awakened part of his abilities, and Hyunmoo has acquired the legendary ability Domination. The MC immediately recognizes what just happened. It is basically a bribe. He finds the whole situation strange, because these stars apparently possess the power to distribute legendary abilities, yet they couldn't block the infernal difficulty. If that is true, then even more people should have caught their attention. Hyunmoo starts thinking about the existence of the scale of difficulty that ability users couldn't overcome. Looking at the mark on his hand, he begins wondering whether these stars might actually be responsible for creating hell. Determined to uncover the truth, the MC decides that he will learn everything he can about these mysterious beings. When Hyunmoo returns to reality, 3 days have already passed. In hell, strength is basically all that matters, but reality comes with a whole different set of problems. He has to figure out exactly where he should return, deal with the suspicious looks of strangers who don't know him, and somehow make his way back home without causing trouble. Once he finally gets there, Hyunmoo starts thinking that he should buy a place of his own. Yumin is confused by his sudden change in attitude and asks why he is suddenly so interested in getting a house. The MC explains that he wants something simple, with huge walls, and even a hospital wing where he can sterilize himself. Yumin immediately tells him that isn't how buying a house works. Hyunmoo is surprised and asks if there aren't any houses like that around here. Yumin gives him the harsh reality. Houses like that do exist, but someone like him would probably just be seen as another poor guy who couldn't afford one. The words completely shake Hyunmoo. Seeing his reaction, Yumin quickly tries to reassure him that she never meant he couldn't buy one if he really wanted it. A little later, the MC admits to himself that she has a point. Before buying anything, he should find a house he actually likes. But suddenly, buying an expensive house would also make people suspicious. For now, he needs to focus on making a lot of money, getting stronger, and increasing his ranking. As for the stars, Hyunmoo still can't stop thinking about them. He wonders why he has to choose only one, when every single one of them seems incredibly powerful. What is the point of forcing him to pick just one? The MC wants everything they are offering. Honestly, he doesn't even care if the world eventually ends. If he becomes strong enough, then he can simply stand above the world with everything beneath his feet. Hyunmoo gets so lost in his thoughts, that Human has to snap him back to reality and tell him to eat his food before it gets cold. The two begin watching television while eating, and the news is currently covering the Baekdu dungeon. The report explains that its barrier could potentially bring long-term peace to the Korean peninsula. The people watching begin commenting on the old collapse and how little attention these events receive nowadays. Hyunmoo asks what exactly the event was, referring to it as a flood. Human explains that a flood happens when monsters escape from a dungeon's containment, including 5-star monsters. Defeating them requires weapons infused with mana, making an attempt to invade a place like that extremely dangerous. If Lee Jae-tae's team succeeds, however, it could lead to something important. After all, every clan agrees that defeating the North is practically impossible. Hyunmoo asks whether they actually succeeded because he can't remember what happened. The news continues while the MC shovels instant noodles into his mouth. A 3-day test is about to begin to select talented people for an upcoming expedition. The test will be as extensive as possible because they need to gather a group capable of entering the dungeon, meaning they are searching for talent on a large scale. That immediately catches Hyunmoo's attention. He turns off the television and starts focusing on the upcoming test, but Human seems annoyed. It turns out she is only irritated because he keeps stopping his meal just to talk. Embarrassed, Hyunmoo apologizes and gets back to eating. Later, at the registration area, the place is packed with people. The MC is already annoyed by the huge crowd, and things get even more irritating when some random guy starts shouting nearby. Hyunmoo turns around angrily and glares at him, only for the man to quickly claim that he wasn't talking to him. The stranger then asks whether this is Hyunmoo's first time. The question makes him remember his childhood, when he had been classified at the orphanage and strangely became the only one to go through that process. He simply confirms that this is his first time. The man immediately says that it was obvious, because Hyunmoo looks like a complete newbie from a mile away. Still, he explains that since the evaluators don't separate new hunters from experienced ones, the registration line becomes pure chaos. Hyunmoo asks if all the hunters are simply mixed together, and the man confirms it. Since the clan is recruiting, everyone has to go through the same process. When Hyunmoo asks if he is also here for recruitment, the man says no. He is only renewing his registration because his level has finally been recognized, meaning that if the evaluation approves it, he can start charging higher prices. Hyunmoo reflects on how everyone is classified according to level. Even weapons struggle to stand against ability users, so it makes sense that people become obsessed with levels. In fact, the whole system makes people incredibly easy to control. If he does anything unusual, someone will notice. Because of that, the MC decides he needs to finish this competition as quickly as possible without drawing attention to himself. The test has 3 stages: identity, status, and skill. During the identity check, the registrar examines Hyunmoo's information and becomes slightly confused. The entire process is buried under layers of bureaucracy, and failing the first stage can create a huge problem. The status test involves taking a blood sample and sending it to a laboratory for analysis. After that comes the most important part, the skill test. It is basically a combat competency evaluation. While waiting, Hyunmoo watches another participant celebrate after getting a score of 140. The normal score for a person is around 100, with some people falling above or below that range. Still, a high score doesn't necessarily mean much, and most people don't care that much about the exact number. Then it is finally Hyunmoo's turn. He places his hand on the device and searches for the sphere inside it. After finding the sphere deep inside, he squeezes it. A loud cracking sound suddenly echoes through the room. Hyunmoo immediately pulls his arm back in shock. The scientists stare at the machine in disbelief, while everyone awkwardly looks at one another. The evaluators can't understand how a device designed only to measure skill could possibly break. They start wondering what kind of level someone would need to have to cause something like this, eventually deciding that the machine itself must have been defective. Hyunmoo is worried that he just broke expensive equipment, but the evaluator calmly tells him that these things happen and asks him to try again. While the staff repairs the device, the MC starts wondering whether he should hold back his strength. This time, he decides not to use too much force, hoping that will keep the machine from breaking again. Eventually, he passes the test, but his evaluation is left pending. Afterward, the participants are divided into groups. Those with higher defense are sent to one side, while those with higher attack are sent to the other. Anyone unsure about their type or possessing some kind of buff is instructed to go to the far left. Hyunmoo listens to the instructions and becomes confused because his own evaluation is still pending. He thinks back to how he even got access to the test in the first place. The staff member had apparently assumed his companions were simply being lazy. She then asks whether his skills were difficult to measure. The MC admits that he isn't sure, but judging by what happened, that seems to be the case. The interviewer tells him she can still let him pass and hands him a pamphlet explaining the next stage. She warns Hyunmoo that this test will be different from the previous one because it will now be conducted under Clan Taesung. She doesn't want to scare him, but there is a serious chance that he could get injured or even die. If he is mainly doing this for money, then despite the company's good pay, she recommends finding another job. Hyunmoo calmly explains that money isn't his reason for participating. That makes the interviewer curious, so she asks what he actually wants: power, status, or perhaps some distorted sense of justice. The MC simply says that nobody can know for sure, but one thing is certain: dungeons are much harder to control than the human world. The woman accepts that as a possibility and releases him, giving him an envelope containing an emergency number and information about the upcoming test. She tells him to read everything carefully because it could save him. Then she reveals the most important detail: the next test will take place inside a dungeon. Hyunmoo laughs casually, saying he is actually curious to see what a dungeon looks like from the inside. Outside, several corporate cars are waiting, along with two tall, muscular men dressed in formal clothing. A distinguished vehicle arrives, immediately drawing attention. Someone opens the door, and a very important figure steps out. It is Lee Jae, looking extremely elegant and handsome, with several fans gathering around him the moment he appears. Lee Jae asks his employee whether everything is ready, and the man confirms it. He also reports that the Red Butterfly is present, along with several other clans, so there is no reason to worry. Lee explains that his real goal isn't Clan Taesung, but the expedition to the north. The people most interested in that expedition possess talent, instinct, and high skill levels, yet they have refused to join any clan until now. Since they finally accepted the invitation to participate in the northern expedition, Lee says they immediately accepted the offer to bring the Red Butterfly as well. He then asks about the new participants. His employee explains that most of them are low level and nobody comes close to the Red Butterfly, but there is one person who is particularly interesting. He shows Lee a photograph of Hyunmoo with goofy expression. The employee explains that the boy possesses poisonous blood. Lee's interest immediately rises. He has shown Hyunmoo's test results, revealing poison levels far beyond normal. Lee admits that it is an interesting ability, although it could become a problem in group combat because Hyunmoo's blood might accidentally harm his allies. Even so, he concludes that the boy is worth watching closely. Then, the candidates are taken to a room labeled Gate B. Several participants are already inside, including a blonde with slicked back hair, a redhead, a four-eyed guy, and of course, Hyunmoo. As soon as the MC enters, an employee catches his attention and hands him something. Hyunmoo has absolutely no idea what is happening. Before he can even properly ask, the employee turns around and walks away. The MC looks at the object in confusion and asks what he is supposed to do with it. When he tries asking the employee again, the man simply walks faster to avoid the questions. Hyunmoo is left standing there completely dumbfounded while the others pretend they didn't see anything. Soon, a voice calls for all the candidates to enter the room, and everyone follows the instructions. They are told that this is the third dungeon of the Yongsan Department's User Skills Gym. As they are guided toward the evaluation room, the announcement continues, explaining that this dungeon is a simulation of a 2-star dungeon based on a dungeon from Eastern Europe. The objective is simple: everyone has to collect as many cards as possible before the test ends. The theme is dungeon survival, and for the next 3 hours, everyone will experience what a real dungeon is like. Each human participant has 1 piece, while the monsters have 3. Whoever collects the most pieces will receive the reward. The four-eyed guy points out that this means humans are also prey alongside the monsters, and asks Hyunmoo if he wants to join their group. The MC casually scratches his ear and simply says no. The others are surprised by how easily he rejects them, but Hyunmoo gives them a mischievous grin and repeats that he doesn't want to join. The guy with glasses tries to convince him, explaining that they have more people, as well as defensive and recovery skills, but Hyunmoo doesn't care. Since the person with the most points wins, forming a group makes little sense because they would eventually have to split the reward. The other guy asks if that is really the only reason he is refusing, and the MC makes it clear that there isn't any other reason. The brute among them then warns him that they will have to fight other groups, but Hyunmoo simply wishes them good luck. That response pushes the brute over the edge. He grabs the shortest guy by his clothes and pulls him closer while cursing at Hyunmoo, saying that if the MC is going to get robbed anyway, he might as well hand over his piece to them. Hyunmoo looks back calmly and agrees, saying that if that's what he wants, then fine. But in the very next instant, he shifts his stance and throws a powerful sideways punch straight into the brute's face. The man goes flying. Hyunmoo casually takes the item from the fallen opponent and gives the others a wicked grin. He realizes he forgot to collect the pieces from these amateurs and asks which one of them wants to hand theirs over next. The four-eyed guy immediately surrenders without hesitation. Hyunmoo looks at him and asks if he seriously thinks the MC will simply take the item and walk away. The guy drops his piece onto the ground in front of him. Hyunmoo asks if he doesn't need it more than he does, but the four-eyed guy explains that the rules never said anything about that. He also points out that the guy who got knocked out was their only defensive fighter, meaning nobody else could stop Hyunmoo. The MC doesn't care about the explanation as long as he has the pass. Meanwhile, Lee Jae and his people are monitoring the test. Lee watches Red Butterfly and praises her performance, saying she is extremely talented and has already stolen several cards. He even believes she could eventually enter 3-star dungeons. His bodyguard agrees that her performance is impressive, but points out that she could grow much further with the right support. For now, there is no need to keep watching her, because only the most talented participants should be able to overcome this challenge, which is mainly a test of endurance. On the screen, Red Butterfly is facing a heavily armored humanoid creature, The bodyguard explains that once the participants begin fighting monsters, even talented hunters will have serious trouble. The mechanized creature prepares to attack, and Lee is asked what exactly it is. He explains that it is a unique android developed by D&W Industries. These monsters are created using spores and skin materials taken from mushroom monsters found in the Sea Noble dungeon. Their official name is Mushroom Droid. Despite the terrible name, they are one of the most advanced technologies available, possessing impressive combat ability, durability, and mana expansion. Thanks to the unique properties of mushroom materials, they can even repair themselves automatically. Several of the mushroom droids are shown fighting participants, with one fighter punching a robot and sending it flying. Lee's explanation continues, stating that weaker participants will have a difficult time dealing with these monsters. Still, being in a group gives even weaker hunters a chance. The real problem is anyone fighting alone, especially Red Butterfly. She could struggle against even a single mushroom droid, particularly because the cards are hidden deep inside the monsters, making them difficult to extract. On top of that, the monsters aren't the only danger. Other participants could also take advantage of her weakened state and finish her off. Suddenly, Lee tells his companion to be quiet. Something on the map has caught his attention. A huge red point has appeared, and Lee realizes that something interesting is about to happen. The mushroom droid stares seriously at the fighter standing before it. That fighter is Hyunmoo, and he is currently overflowing with rage and frustration. Then, instead of looking afraid, the MC suddenly bursts into laughter. He had been expecting an actual monster. As the mushroom droid approaches, Hyunmoo instantly launches himself forward and punches it directly in the face, deforming its metal head. He complains that the monster doesn't even say anything. The mushroom droid tries to resist the force and anchors itself to the ground, but Hyunmoo is already preparing another attack. He comments that the robot's movements are extremely simple before landing a precise hook against its chin. The monster loses its balance, and Hyunmoo grabs one of its legs and throws the entire thing into the air. Its fighting skills are ridiculously low. The MC starts gritting his teeth and hyperventilating from sheer frustration, then looks toward the sky and complains that this situation isn't fun at all. When the surroundings are shown, the reason becomes obvious. Hyunmoo has already defeated countless monsters. He hasn't just beaten them either, he has completely destroyed them. He grabs one of the fallen mushroom droids and uses dismantle to break apart its body, pulling the card directly from inside. The MC calls the entire thing way too easy and can't understand how the test became this boring. Looking at the card in his hand, he grows even more irritated. Then the speaker announces that 34 minutes have passed since the game began. More than 30% of the available points have already been collected, so the current rankings are being announced. In third place is Hongrion with 7 points. In second place is Red Butterfly with 9 points. And in first place is Hyunmoo with 16 points. The MC immediately starts bragging about his lead, saying he would rather fight goblins than these weak puppets. Still, he decides to inspect the items he has collected. What he finds is surprisingly ordinary. They are basically spores mixed with meat. Hyunmoo finds the material interesting because it is being processed despite coming from a monster. He wonders if the same material is used in the scarecrows, which might explain why those things are so ridiculously durable. The leather suddenly begins shining and moving around his arm, making the MC wonder if he can actually turn it into something useful. He activates his crafting ability, and a massive glow bursts from the material. When the light fades, he has successfully created protectors for his arms and legs using the monster leather. Excited about his new equipment, Hyunmoo doesn't waste any time. With the remaining participants and monsters still out there, the MC starts walking forward to take care of the rest. Meanwhile, Red Butterfly looks at the scoreboard and silently wonders why she keeps ending up behind that boy. Before she can dwell on it for long, several competitors suddenly rush toward her, attempting to ambush her. Multiple spells are fired at her at once, but she reacts instantly. Red Butterfly launches herself into the air with such force that the ground cracks beneath her. She begins moving across the walls, jumping and running between them while dodging every attack, almost as if she is flying. With another massive leap, she evades several attacks at once, spinning through the air like she is dancing between the incoming spells. The attacks collide and explode around her, but she has already returned safely to the ground. She lands among several opponents she has already defeated and calmly stares at the others, leaving them completely stunned by the movements they just witnessed. Red Butterfly takes another combat stance and prepares for whoever comes next. Before anyone can make a move, several fighters are suddenly launched into the air, one after another. Red Butterfly hears Hungrion's voice calling out to her. Hungrion is worried that her friend will get hurt if she keeps pushing herself this hard. Red Butterfly points out that she is only trying to maintain her second place ranking, but Hungrion reminds her that their real goal is the expedition to the north. They already have enough points. When she asks their other teammate to confirm it, he reveals that they have 88 pieces combined. Even that isn't enough for Red Butterfly. She moves away from the group, and when Hungrion asks where she is going, Red Butterfly simply tells them to continue at their own pace. She then jumps away before Hungrion can convince her to stay. Back at the evaluation booth, the evaluators are still trying to figure out exactly who Kang Hyunmoo is. The recruiter explains that all of the MC's skills are still pending review. Lee Ji-tae asks if he is the same boy with poisonous blood, and the answer is confirmed. They then ask if Hyunmoo is the person who was already inside the dungeon earlier. which is also confirmed. Jitae's guard wonders if he might be one of those talented hunters who enter dungeons without permission. His companion asks if he means the rogues, but points out that Hyunmoo has no criminal record. The blonde adds that the laws across the opposite sea are more flexible, so that possibility can't be ruled out. Back inside the test, Hyunmoo casually shakes one of the monster items, while looking forward to seeing what the other participants are capable of. Meanwhile, Red Butterfly is running through the dungeon in search of something. The MC decides to try eating some of the monster meat he collected. The system identifies it as normal, so he takes a bite. 1 second later, he spits it straight back out. The taste is absolutely horrible, and Hyunmoo complains that even though he is starving, eating this stuff will be difficult. But the relaxed mood disappears when he suddenly gets a terrible feeling. Something is approaching at an insane speed. He turns around, expecting to see another talented hunter, only to find Red Butterfly charging straight toward him. She doesn't waste a second. Red Butterfly leaps forward with an explosive burst of power, and Hyunmoo barely dodges the attack. She looks extremely serious and angry as she prepares herself for battle, and asks whether he is alone. Hyunmoo sarcastically claims that he has 150 men surrounding the area, and asks why she even needs to know. Red Butterfly silently observes him for a moment before confirming that he is, in fact, alone. Then she lets out a battle cry and challenges him to show her what he can do. The MC notices that her level is almost twice his, but he barely has time to process the difference before she launches a direct punch. Hyunmoo blocks it with both arms, but is shocked by the sheer force behind the attack. Before he can respond, Red Butterfly immediately follows with a front kick. This time, he dodges instead of blocking, knowing that taking a direct hit from someone this powerful could send him straight to the afterlife. Even after missing, Red Butterfly quickly follows with another kick, but Hyunmoo evades again. Her foot crashes into the ground and leaves serious damage behind. The MC starts laughing nervously because he realizes just how screwed he would be without battle assistant. Another kick flies past him, and he bends backward to avoid it. Thanks to the battle assistant, he can readjust his movements and evade much more easily, but there is barely any time to breathe. Red Butterfly is already preparing another kick. Hyunmoo dodges that one too, but he realizes he has absolutely no room to counterattack. He is getting exhausted while trying to maintain his distance, and he openly hates the situation. Red Butterfly also realizes that Hyunmoo is holding something back. She assumes it is an ability too dangerous to use against normal humans, but against someone as powerful as her, she believes he can finally use it. More importantly, she knows he won't be able to keep avoiding her forever. One of Hyunmoo's fists begins glowing with a bluish energy as Red Butterfly charges toward him at incredible speed. The two rush toward each other with massive blue and red energy spreading throughout the arena. Their fight becomes even more intense as both stare at each other with pure determination. The moment their opposing energies collide, a blinding light fills the entire area. Both of them are determined to end the fight quickly. Red Butterfly throws another punch, but suddenly something goes wrong. Her arm and leg are struck simultaneously, and the damage forces her to collapse onto the ground. Hyunmoo is exhausted and struggles to catch his breath. He tells her to hand over her pieces. Still unable to believe she lost, Red Butterfly throws the bag onto the ground. She then asks what kind of ability Hyunmoo was using, but before she can get an answer, he hears a strange sound approaching. He turns around and immediately becomes nervous when he realizes how close the attacker is. A moment later, a powerful blow sends him flying. His body spins across the ground through several somersaults. Hongrion becomes furious after seeing her friend's injuries, but tries to calm her down by pointing out that the opponent was clearly very strong. Hyunmoo, still on the ground, angrily identifies himself as the bastard who hurt Red Butterfly. Soon, the announcer declares that 3 hours have passed and the match is officially over. When the rankings are about to be announced, Hyunmoo becomes nervous because he isn't sure whether he managed to keep first place. Third place goes to Ha Yoontaek with 21 pieces. Then Hyunmoo is announced in second place with 69 pieces. The MC is stunned. The grand champion is Red Butterfly, who finishes with 88 pieces. Hongrion isn't surprised at all by her friend's victory. Red Butterfly herself looks confused until she notices the huge number of pieces around her. Hyunmoo realizes she must have collected more while he was distracted, but she insists that there has been some misunderstanding. With his back still hurting, the MC decides not to argue and tries to leave. Hongrion, however, refuses to let him walk away without apologizing for what happened. Hyunmoo knows he can't afford to draw attention to himself, but he also has absolutely no intention of apologizing for a fight he believes was fair. He realizes they seem to think he was trying to steal her pieces. That wasn't what happened at all. He fought her fairly and won, even after she later ended up taking first place from him. More importantly, Hyunmoo doesn't consider himself a bad person, but if they want to push him, he is perfectly willing to teach them a lesson. With a single word, Hyunmoo activates domination. Hongrion keeps shouting at him, desperately trying to get his attention, but then her expression suddenly changes. Something feels wrong with her body. Red Butterfly notices the change and immediately asks what happened. Hyunmoo remains silent as the spell spreads throughout the surrounding area. Suddenly, terrifying creatures appear behind him. Hongrion collapses in despair after seeing them. Only she can see those monsters. which explains why she becomes so desperate. Her teammates rush over to help while doctors and paramedics quickly arrive at the scene. Hyunmoo realizes the situation has become much worse than he intended. Before things can escalate any further, he quietly slips away. Elsewhere, Lee Jae and his people watch everything that happened. Jae is impressed by the precision of Hyunmoo's move and remarks that for something caused by a misunderstanding, the attack was almost too precise. He also notices that the user responsible isn't even level 10, yet he is already capable of surpassing experienced hunters. The guard nervously asks whether they should meet with Red Butterfly, but Lee Jae has another priority first. He wants to have a conversation with Kang Hyunmoo. Meanwhile, the MC is already exhausted and uses a cold can to ease the pain in his body. Battle Assistant with Valiant Energy is working perfectly fine, but Domination consumed a huge amount of his mana. Hyunmoo immediately regrets using it and feels like he just wasted a massive chunk of his mana for nothing. Suddenly, a mysterious figure calls out to him. It is Tae-min-soo, the leader of the Taesung clan secretariat team, who congratulates Hyunmoo for successfully passing the test. He hands over his card and explains that the clan would be more than happy to provide everything necessary to help him develop his abilities. They would even make sure he reaches his full potential as a hunter. Confused, the MC carefully examines the business card and mutters something that leaves Tae-min-soo confused. Then, with genuine curiosity, Hyunmoo asks whether they can help him reach the stars. Meanwhile, Captain Lee Jae sits in the back of his car, carefully watching the recorded fight on his laptop. He repeatedly replays the battle between Red Butterfly and Hyunmoo, smiling as he analyzes every single movement. To him, it is almost like watching a movie. A tap on the glass catches his attention as Tae-min-soo returns and apologizes for failing to recruit the MC. He explains that Hyunmoo wasn't interested even after hearing the conditions, but Jae had already expected that. Tae-min-soo then mentions that when Hyunmoo rejected the offer, he said something about the stars. Jae wonders if that is some kind of new term used by the younger generation, but admits that he has never heard it before. Meanwhile, Red Butterfly accepted the offer because her only goal is to participate in the Northern Expedition. Jae thanks Tae-min-soo for the information and says he will head home. Before leaving, Tae-min-soo tells his captain to be careful on the way back. Once inside the car, Jae continues thinking about what Hyunmoo's strange response could mean. He can't come up with a satisfying answer, so one thing becomes clear. He needs to keep an eye on Hyunmoo. Back in the car with Yoonmin, Hyunmoo is carrying something that immediately catches her attention. The MC explains that the card in his hand came from a talent recruiter who approached him after the test, but Yoonmin is more interested in the large box sitting on his lap. Hyunmoo opens it and starts trying to explain what it contains. After the match, Red Butterfly had apparently apologized desperately, explaining that Hongrian had only been trying to do her best. Hyunmoo remembers the powerful woman from earlier, especially how frightened Hongrian became after Domination was activated and how her teammates had to help her. After thinking about everything, the MC decides to forget the whole incident. Red Butterfly also believes that the first place prize should have belonged to Hyunmoo, so she hands it over to him. He has no choice but to accept it. Inside the box are 2 tenacious gauntlets that increase the strength and defense of the hands. Yoonmin then informs him that she sold the crystal moss to Park Hwiso, who showed genuine interest in the material. Hyunmoo immediately starts wondering if someone is working behind the scenes. That would explain why they are so desperate to obtain the crystal moss. If there really is someone interested in it, dealing with them directly would be much more profitable than going through an intermediary like Park. The MC also remembers how suspicious Park Hwiso seemed and realizes that the old man is definitely not an easy target. Meanwhile, Yoonmin asks whether the gloves are the only reward he received from the test. Hyunmoo starts rummaging through the box and wonders where the cash prize is. A moment later, a piece of paper falls onto his lap. He picks it up and shows it to Yoonmin. Suddenly excited, the MC asks if she wants to go eat some meat and celebrate with the newly acquired prize money. The total reward amounts to 50 million won. Soon after, Yoonmin parks the car in its usual spot and the two head inside. On the way, they talk about the association and how much more respect it seems to have for hunters these days. Yoonmin is worried that Hyunmoo should be more careful, but the MC simply shrugs it off. Then, something suddenly catches his attention. He smells something strange. As Yoonmin presses the elevator button, Hyunmoo realizes exactly what it is. Blood. The smell keeps getting stronger, and his instincts immediately tell him something is wrong. He orders Yoonmin not to enter the house, and instead tells her to go straight back to the car, lock herself inside, and stay there until he returns. Following the scent, Hyunmoo moves through the building until he reaches the back, where he comes across a horrifying scene. Several men have already been taken down by a mysterious figure. The old man responsible turns out to be Park Hwiso, who seems almost pleased to meet the MC again after so long. He explains that the men are members of the Japanese Yakuza who were after the mysterious crystal moss. If Park hadn't arrived, Yoonmin could have been caught in the middle of it, but Park didn't come here purely out of kindness. As a small proposal, he asks Hyunmoo to form an alliance with Taesung. The MC immediately points out that he just rejected an offer from the clan. Park explains that he investigated Hyunmoo afterward, but couldn't find much information about him. It is almost as if someone erased his entire existence. On top of that, Park heard about the incredible movements Hyunmoo displayed inside the dungeon movements that normally belong to highly experienced hunters. Realizing what the old man is trying to do, Hyunmoo thanks him for his help, but makes it clear that Park is misunderstanding him. He has no interest in joining organizations. Park's expression suddenly changes, and Hyunmoo immediately senses the situation turning dangerous. Before he can say much else, the old man launches a powerful attack. The MC desperately tells him to listen a little longer, but Park ignores him and swings again. Hyunmoo barely manages to dodge. He reaches into his pocket, still trying to make the old man stop and actually hear him, but Park isn't interested in talking anymore. Hyunmoo finally puts on his tenacious gauntlets and drives a powerful punch into Park's face, sending him backward. Park instantly recognizes the gloves as the first-place prize that belonged to Red Butterfly. Hyunmoo calmly insists that using them was nothing more than self-defense. The two face each other again, both clearly done with the conversation. Park's anger deepens as he removes his overcoat. He realizes words aren't going to work with this stubborn kid, so he decides to settle the matter through force. He suddenly throws his suit over Hyunmoo's vision, but the trick doesn't work. The MC has already been following his movements closely. Park then transforms his cane into a sword and charges forward, determined to end the argument by any means necessary. Hyunmoo shouts while activating Battle Assistant and prepares himself. The two exchange a series of intense attacks, with the MC barely managing to dodge each strike. He eventually plants his hands against the ground, builds momentum, and launches himself over the old man, landing behind Park without him noticing. Hyunmoo grins because he has achieved exactly what he wanted, but his celebration lasts about a second. An attack suddenly comes toward him, forcing him to dodge at the last moment. He closes the distance again and activates domination to defend himself. Park notices what Hyunmoo is trying to do, but the MC catches him off guard and manages to restrain him. The old man's eyes roll back as he falls into the spell, seemingly losing control. Hyunmoo is ready to finish the fight, but then he suddenly stops. Something feels wrong. Park snaps out of the trance and brings his weapon dangerously close to Hyunmoo's face. The MC realizes too late that what he saw was an illusion. A deep cut opens across his body, and the pain immediately shows on his face. Park had no intention of killing him, which is why the blade struck his wrist instead of his neck. His real objective was to extract information about whoever was supposedly giving Hyunmoo orders. Instead of panicking, Hyunmoo suddenly starts laughing. Park is confused by the strange reaction, but then notices smoke rising from his sword. The weapon is slowly being corroded. He immediately suspects poisonous blood. Hyunmoo takes advantage of the distraction, reaches toward Park's face, and drives him backward with the gauntlets, until the old man's body crashes into a thick wall. Park drops his sword and struggles to resist the tremendous force. Despite all his experience, he apparently has no real resistance to poison. Hyunmoo realizes the fight has suddenly shifted in his favor. Unfortunately, Park is far from finished. He launches a counterattack and smashes his elbow into Hyunmoo's arm, breaking it. The MC screams from the pain and loses some of his strength. Park follows with a powerful kick to the stomach that sends him flying. Both fighters stand battered and exhausted, staring each other down. Park reaches inside his vest and pulls out a small vial containing a mysterious liquid. Without hesitation, he pours it over his face. Hyunmoo sarcastically praises the medicine and even asks if Park has any left to share. The old man is stunned. He is certain he broke Hyunmoo's arm and ribs, yet the MC is already standing normally. Park suspects some kind of healing ability, but Hyunmoo doesn't care about the injuries. He just wants to keep fighting. Park eventually lowers his weapon and declares that the fight is over. His original goal was to offer Hyunmoo a deal, not fight him. Since the MC resisted much more than expected, Park becomes even more curious about who is supposedly pulling his strings. Hyunmoo insists that nobody is behind him. He is completely alone. Park again suggests joining Tae-sung, but the MC has zero interest in working for anyone. Then Hyunmoo's thoughts shift. He realizes Park himself could be useful. The old man has connections, information, and enough strength to handle dangerous situations. Hyunmoo doesn't want to let such an opportunity slip away. As Park turns to leave, the MC starts talking about Tae-sung, pointing out that the clan is smaller than organizations like the Lotus Clan and others. He says he will do whatever it takes to make Park forget about Tae-sung and Lee Jae-tae, and instead invest in someone younger like him. Park laughs at the arrogance, calling such thinking the words of a fool who doesn't understand reality and an ambitious loser. Hyunmoo barely reacts. When Park provokes him again, the old man prepares his weapon, but the damaged sword is already in terrible condition. Even so, Park suddenly rushes toward the MC. Hyunmoo's eyes widen as the old man's blade cuts through the air and barely misses him, slicing off a bit of his hair before smashing into the wall behind him. Park explains that plenty of Tae-sung members are stronger than Hyunmoo, and above all of them stands Lee Jae-tae. To Park, it isn't even funny that someone barely at level 10 is talking this arrogantly. Hyunmoo, however, doesn't understand what makes Lee Jae-tae so impressive. That response genuinely shocks Park. The MC then decides to show him exactly what he can do. Energy begins coursing through his body as he confidently declares that he will prove himself better than Jae-tae. He even asks how much stronger he needs to become before Park will admit that he is better. The old man realizes he is basically encouraging the stubborn idiot, but he answers anyway. Lee Jae-tae reached level 20 only 6 months after becoming a hunter. That's why Tae-sung supports someone like him. For an ordinary hunter, reaching that level would normally take more than a year. If Hyunmoo wants to prove that he is different, That is the minimum standard he needs to beat. Park gathers his belongings and prepares to leave, but Hyunmoo confidently declares that he will accomplish it within 2 weeks. He wants Park to see with his own eyes that he can surpass Lee Ji-tae and then reconsider working with him. Park considers the entire proposal completely ridiculous. Before leaving, he gives one final warning. Wherever Hyunmoo plans to train, it had better be a place capable of pushing him harder than Lee Ji-tae ever was. With that, Park walks away, leaving the MC alone. Hyunmoo simply smiles. He already knows exactly where he needs to go. The ruined landscape stretches around Hyunmoo, with buildings completely destroyed and corroded by time. Suddenly, the MC charges forward with his fist clenched, ready to take down another monster. Across from him, the creature lets out a furious scream. Hyunmoo's speed is so fast that the monster can barely keep up. Even after knocking it to the ground, he continues raining down attacks, but the creature suddenly spots an opening and lunges forward with its mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Its jaws clamp down hard on his hand, catching Hyunmoo completely off guard and sending pain through his body. Even so, he knows he can still win. Instead of pulling away, he pushes his injured hand deeper into the monster's throat. As the creature thrashes around desperately, the MC jokes that if something gets put inside its mouth, it shouldn't spit it back out. A moment later, blood sprays across the ruined surroundings. The monster's head is completely destroyed and its jaw is shattered, pushing Hyunmoo to level 15. High above, the conquering star Ardan watches the scene with interest. Hyunmoo looks toward the sky, wondering if he can notice anything unusual, while his bitten hand remains badly injured and covered in blood. After the fight, Hyunmoo reflects on what just happened. Once he bandages his hand, he realizes he probably pushed his body harder than necessary. Renian, who has returned, immediately scolds her butler for fighting so recklessly. Hyunmoo notices her and wonders where she has been all this time. But the fairy is far more interested in his injured hand. She even tries sucking his blood through a straw. The MC doesn't really care, because if he dies while fighting in hell, he can simply revive again. Besides, things are actually improving for him. This is much better than wandering around trying to find random monsters just to level up. The only problem is that one enemy is still missing. Hyunmoo remembers the red-hooded goblin from his very first encounter. Out of all the goblins he has fought, that one has never appeared again. He suspects it might be the strongest of them all. While distracted by his thoughts, the MC fails to notice the creature approaching stealthily. The goblin walks calmly through the ruins, with a hook replacing one of its arms. Hyunmoo finally notices it and immediately jumps backward. He tells Renian to hide, but the fairy has already disappeared and left him completely alone. The red-hooded goblin moves toward the pile of bodies and carefully sniffs each one before suddenly releasing an enraged scream. Its eyes lock onto Hyunmoo, filled with fury and grief after seeing so many of its kind dead. The MC equips his weapons and decides there is no point wasting time talking. The goblin is equally determined to end his life. The system suddenly announces Hyunmoo's death and reveals the new mission: enemies on a wooden bridge. His objective is to defeat the black-handed goblin. Remembering the red-hooded monster, the MC realizes he must have left it completely enraged during their previous encounter. Back then, he had no chance to defend himself and was simply overwhelmed. But now, while lying on the ground after another death, Hyunmoo thinks that it is still just a goblin and shouldn't be impossible to beat. He gets back up and begins planning a trap, using poison spikes and a deep hole. While mentally counting everything he needs, the creature suddenly approaches at terrifying speed. Hyunmoo hears its footsteps and turns around, only to die again after a total survival time of 1 minute. By the 6th attempt at enemies on a wooden bridge, the MC is running desperately, while the goblin chases him without giving him a second to breathe. Determined not to lose again, Hyunmoo uses his gauntlets to launch a counterattack and briefly believes he has discovered a weakness. That confidence lasts only a moment before the goblin lands a devastating sword strike. Once again, the MC realizes he is completely outmatched. He even considers hiding after his next resurrection. An old saying about revenge only creating more revenge crosses his mind, along with the idea that forgiveness is the path to true victory. But Hyunmoo would rather die than forgive this particular goblin. He refuses to spend the rest of his time running away and leveling up while leaving his enemy unpunished. If someone tries to stab him in the back, he intends to make them pay in kind. Running away forever would be even worse because his pride simply wouldn't allow it. Meanwhile, the Red Chaos Goblin wanders through the wreckage. After not seeing the human for a while, it begins wondering if its enemy has finally left, but it knows better than to relax. The human can resurrect and is extremely cunning. Its ultimate goal is to prevent Hyunmoo from getting anywhere near the rest of the goblins. Suddenly, another goblin arrives with tears in its eyes and calls out to Red Cap Goblin Kirsten. It brings terrible news. Everyone is dying. Someone poisoned the entire water supply, leaving countless goblins sick and fighting for their lives. They can't even hunt animals anymore because the poison has contaminated their food sources as well. Kirsten immediately suspects Hyunmoo. To him, the human is the only one capable of doing something this cruel. He regrets not capturing and killing the MC when he had the chance. Another goblin then calls for Kirsten, saying that something needs his attention. A child is crying in his arms, desperately searching for Kirsten. Seeing his son, the Red Cap Goblin's eyes fill with emotion. Despite his companions trying to stop him, Kirsten decides to leave. They warn him that revenge is pointless against an enemy who can resurrect. They should abandon the conflict, move somewhere else, and give the human no reason to keep attacking them. But Kirsten refuses. He wants revenge. His companions eventually realize there is no stopping him. Then one of the goblins notices something strange. A scout who had just returned is lying on the ground, and the smell of poison is coming from its body. They immediately realize it must be another trap. The smartest move would be to return to the hideout and warn everyone. The scattered clues suggest that Hyunmoo is deliberately trying to lure them away from the others. Kirsten decides to remain outside and hunt the human himself. He is confident it will be an easy fight, since the human is still weaker than him. His companions remain worried, but Kirsten assures them he will return alive, even without resurrection powers. Kirsten walks alone through the destroyed landscape, surrounded by the remains of the apocalyptic city. Suddenly, he hears something approaching. The goblin reacts faster and knocks away the incoming weapon with his hook. Fury fills his eyes as he prepares to give the human a painful death, but Hyunmoo is already standing behind him, waiting for the battle to begin. With a wicked smile, the MC tells Kirsten that he will give him a chance. Of course, Hyunmoo is actually mocking him, saying that he is giving the goblin the opportunity to die by his hands. Kirsten doesn't understand what the human is trying to accomplish. Hyunmoo explains that if he really wanted to kill every goblin with poison, none of them would still be alive. Some have died this time, but he has no idea what might happen next. Since he can resurrect, the MC is curious whether Kirsten can actually prevent his death. Kirsten's plan is different. He wants to capture Hyunmoo alive, cut off his limbs, and make him regret everything. The MC blocks Kirsten's sword with his magical gauntlets, and reminds him that he can simply die and come back to life. He could threaten Kirsten's family in return, but he doesn't want to hurt innocent people. All Hyunmoo wants is revenge against the goblin that killed him repeatedly. But if Kirsten keeps coming after him, that restraint might eventually disappear. Realizing his family is being placed at risk, Kirsten finally throws down his sword. His plan is to offer his own life in exchange for the safety of his people. He demands that after killing him, Hyunmoo leave the area and never touch another member of his group. The MC sees the opportunity and bends down to pick up the sword, apparently agreeing. But the moment Hyunmoo lowers his guard, Kirsten strikes. The MC is sent flying and crashes onto the ground, hitting his head. He immediately realizes he has been tricked. Kirsten launches himself into the air and charges after him, determined to end the fight. His sword comes down with tremendous force, but he senses hesitation and pushes even harder. His face is filled with hatred as he tries to deliver the most painful death possible. Hyunmoo desperately blocks with his gauntlets, but Kirsten refuses to stop. Another attack comes, and the goblin makes it clear that he intends to ignore everything that was said and finish the human anyway. Yet the MC still has a smile on his face. Even while losing, he thinks Kirsten is an idiot for not killing him when he had the chance. His health drops below 10%. Then regeneration activates. Hyunmoo's strength suddenly returns, and he launches a counterattack. His fist crashes into Kirsten's stomach, causing the goblin to stagger in pain. Hyunmoo immediately grabs him by the neck. Kirsten attempts to retaliate with his hook arm, but the MC reads the movement and dodges. He throws the goblin across the battlefield, sending it crashing into a wall. But Hyunmoo has no intention of letting him escape punishment. He approaches with a smile, looking completely refreshed, despite the damage he just took. Kirsten is horrified by the MC's sheer audacity. Another devastating attack tears into the wall. Then a strange, bright energy rushes toward the goblin. Even while heavily injured, Hyunmoo keeps recovering at an absurd rate. Kirsten realizes his opponent must be hiding some kind of powerful ability. No matter how many attacks he takes, the human keeps getting back up and coming for him. A final knockout blow crashes into Kirsten's face, leaving the goblin barely able to defend itself. Suddenly, Hyunmoo becomes 10 times stronger than before, and his attacks grow even more devastating. Kirsten desperately tries to understand what is happening. Someone this close to death shouldn't be capable of fighting like this. He struggles to recover among the rubble, while Hyunmoo sees the situation differently. To him, it is nothing special. Kirsten was simply careless. Every time they fought before, the goblin killed him with the same attack. Because of that, they never actually had a proper fight. Kirsten had become so confident that he could kill Hyunmoo whenever he wanted that he never considered the possibility of things changing. The blame for this situation was entirely his own carelessness. Exhausted, Kirsten calls the human arrogant and insists that he can still defeat him. He gets back up and declares that he will destroy Hyunmoo's neck, but then blood suddenly pours from his mouth. The MC smiles. The fight is finally over. Kirsten is losing all of his strength and can barely remain standing. Unlike his opponent, Hyunmoo has no intention of making the same mistake twice. Desperate, Kirsten begs for forgiveness for all the times he killed Hyunmoo. He explains that the souls of those who cannot be blessed cannot survive in this place, and if he dies, all of his people will die as well. He remembers Hyunmoo promising that he wouldn't harm his family, and waits anxiously for the MC's response. But Hyunmoo is already thinking about something else. If he kills Kirsten, will he gain the experience of all the others as well? Satisfied by the thought, he raises his weapon and prepares to finish the fight. Kirsten's eyes fill with fear. Hyunmoo shows no hesitation. He cuts off the goblin's head and throws it aside. The red sky illuminates the ruined city as the MC takes a deep breath and looks across the destroyed landscape. For a moment, everything feels strangely clean. Then the system announces that Hyunmoo has defeated the level 21 red-hooded goblin, completing the enemies on a wooden bridge mission. As his reward, he receives a silver box, upgraded to a gold box. His return stone is also activated, and most importantly, killing Kirsten allows him to level up 3 times. Suddenly, Renian appears and calls Hyunmoo her butler. After the goblin's body passes through a thorough inspection, the fairy happily drinks all of its blood. Meanwhile, the MC wants to understand what made Kirsten so powerful. His physical abilities were far too impressive to be explained by a simple weapon. While examining the body, something unusual catches his attention. Hyunmoo grabs the goblin's hand and carefully studies the strange writing covering its skin. The markings look completely different from anything he has ever seen before. At that moment, the shattering star gull begins guiding his hand. An unusual movement starts taking place, leaving Hyunmoo completely confused. Then, something suddenly forces its way through his hand. His expression changes as he tries to understand what just happened. The MC realizes that he has absorbed a fragment of gull, leaving a tattoo-like mark on his hand. As a result, he acquires a legendary level family of skills. Meanwhile, in a quiet white room, Yumin is sleeping peacefully in bed with the curtains closed. She wants to rest a little longer, but a voice suddenly starts calling her desperately. Yumin opens her eyes and looks around, her hair completely messy from sleep. She doesn't even hear the door properly before realizing that the intruder is just Hyunmoo. Her tension immediately disappears. Looking at him more carefully, she asks whether he has eaten anything. She gets out of bed and explains that there isn't much food at home, so she plans to visit the nearest convenience store. But before she can leave, Hyunmoo grabs her arm. He stops her because there is something important he needs to discuss. The MC isn't sure whether he should tell her the entire truth. Before he can decide, Yumin brings up Park Hwiso, who appeared 2 days earlier, and asks if something is wrong with Hyunmoo. Park's curiosity clearly wasn't just about the crystal moss. There seemed to be something much deeper behind it. Yumin finally loses her patience and demands to know what kind of secrets Hyunmoo is hiding and what he has been doing whenever he disappears. She wants to know why he keeps vanishing and suddenly showing up again. Seeing how overwhelmed she has become, Hyunmoo holds her arms and tells her to calm down. From that point onward, the MC decides to tell Yumin everything. He understands why she reacted this way. She has been deeply involved in everything happening around him. Yet whenever something urgent happens, she tries to act as if everything is completely normal. With all the stress building up, it makes sense that she finally snapped. Hyunmoo has relied on Yumin's help countless times, to the point where he can no longer imagine his life without her. The thought of something happening to her while he is trapped in that horrible place terrifies him. If she were ever gone, he would be completely alone. That's why he finally tells her about the return stone and its ability to resurrect him countless times. As Yumin listens, she slowly understands the reason behind his repeated disappearances. Hyunmoo admits that even he can't predict how long each trip will last or when he will return. Nervously, Yumin asks what would happen if one day he simply didn't come back. The question hits the MC harder than expected. He realizes he should have explained everything much earlier. Still, Hyunmoo assures her that no matter how long it takes, he will always return. He tells Yumin that she is his beacon in the middle of the darkness. Yumin moves closer and says she doesn't want to be just a beacon. She wants Hyunmoo to tell her whenever he needs help. If something happens to him, she will do everything she can to save him and keep him safe. The MC becomes nervous and asks her to move away because he hasn't bathed and probably smells terrible. Yumin doesn't seem to care at all. Instead, she simply settles down on his legs with a small smile and casually points out that she hasn't bathed either. Then she makes an unexpected offer. They could just take a bath together.